Rendering values on cylinders with both pen and markers. It's pretty much like rendering the value with the markers on spheres. Conceptually, it's the same as when you're rendering value with the Prismacolor. In terms of all the elements of value, you think about your core shadow, your light side, your shadow side, your highlight, your reflected light, and your cast shadow, your ambient occlusion. And so once you recognize and understand what your light source is, and after a while this becomes really repetitive, so the only thing you really need to know is, where's my light source, and do I want this to be an outdoor light source with parallel shadows so that it's an easier job for me. I shouldn't say this, but no one will know if you're doing an interior scene and you make the shadows like you would outdoors where you have parallel shadows. No one would really know the difference. No, that's not true. Somebody would, but you don't have to obsess over, like, I've got to make these long stretching shadows because that's the point of where my light source is. It's useful, it's beneficial, it makes your illustrations more believable, but always keep in mind that what we're trying to do here is some really rapid drawing. So always planning where my light rays are, always planning where my cast shadow is. In this case, I again started with the pens. I went in and I gave a little bit more value to the held lines, like the exterior silhouette lines, and then I went in with my darkest marker and I started establishing the shadows, and then you can see that I'm doing a little bit of blending. I'm pretty sure this is my 30% pen because I'm going all the way up into the light side, and if I'm going into the light side, I know that I'm using a lighter marker. I'm definitely not using the 50% or the 70%. And when I'm using that 30%, in this case, I'm using it more like a blender, where again, because these are alcohol-based markers, that you can smoosh around some of that value because of the alcohol that's in the marker. So same thing, we're just casting these shadows, whether it's outdoor light, artificial light, same thing. We just try to find that the axis in our cylinder, and then from the bottom we connect that to the casting. And then in this case, I believe I did guesstimate where the middle part, that central axis, is on the other cylinder that I'm rendering. And then you saw I touched the other cylinder because once it dried, I saw that core shadow didn't have as much value, range, and emphasis as I wanted, so I went and touched it again with some more value, and you can see that core shadow popped. So in this case, I'm just navigating around that sphere down there. You want to render that in, but for demonstration purposes, I just left it as is. And because again, this is going to be on the shadow side, what I'm doing is I'm just rendering the entirety of that side with a darker value. When you're rendering value on anything, the most important element is you have to have patience. Even with these markers, I did some value on the light side. Wow, okay. Even with these markers, if you rush through this, when you let your paper dry, because you do need to give these markers some time to dry, your value is going to shift a little bit, so you may have to go back in and massage it a little bit. So, and then I use the number 5 again just to add a little bit more of that sort of ambient occlusion, the darker part of the shadow that's up against the object, just to make it pop, because I like contrast. I love contrast. So because I like the contrast, I will on an occasion go back in and add a little bit of scribble here and there just to punch the value. Not a requirement, not a necessity. It's just something that occasionally I will do. If you want, you can just utilize your markers, and you can see that there's a press release, and you don't want to mush these markers really hard because you can potentially damage the tips, and you don't want to damage the tips. So you're just giving them enough pressure to apply the value.